pretty crazy.
In that community that you're in, what's the demographic? Kind of give us a visual of what that looks and feels like as far as the demographic of the community that you're serving.
I work and live in the capital city of Des Moines. Our Black population is not high at all. More so in the city, we're probably above maybe 10 or 11% in the city. As far as African Americans, statewide, we're probably drastically less than that. So for the most part, Iowa is a white state.
Okay. All right. Steve, tell us what the pulse is. What's the climate down where you're at? And let people know where you're at.
I live in Scottsdale. The climate here is 106 degrees, very hot now. I know what you're saying, but I'm comparing it to what I hear about Chicago. So where we live, I haven't seen really anything other than some stuff I've seen on TV on Sunday, I think it was, when there were some demonstrations downtown Phoenix. And then those started turning violent, and then all of a sudden there's some stuff going on in like Old Town Scottsdale, which is really bars and restaurants, and people just started going over there and then started looting. Like they just broke into Fashion Square Mall, which is like one of the bigger malls down in Old Town, and randomly just ran in and started ransacking. But other than that, I don't really see much. And I'll tell you, over here, it's everybody has a gun and multiple guns, and everybody's kind of trigger happy, and I would not want to be somebody coming into somebody's home right here. I'll tell you that. Everybody's the people carrying guns here is unbelievable. Way different than living in Chicago.
And that's a great point. I'm going to come back to that, but that's a great point. LJ.
So in the south suburbs, it was relatively quiet in the sense that we didn't get hit as hard as the city of Chicago.
Okay.
But where I am, they did burn down the DMV. They broke into, the Foot Lockers, things like that. Okay. So the upside is that where I am, we have a pretty strong police force.
Okay.
And since it is a small community, and a lot of high taxes, so we're fortunate in that sense that we have a larger police force that was able to get out immediately and begin to protect some of those businesses. But the next day I got in my car, I drove around to see what damage that had happened in the community. Not a lot, not like Chicago. And that was really my concern because of course, if you are tax paying, you're thinking about, okay, what is this doing to my community? What's happening? I stayed in, didn't participate in any protest or anything. I think the worst that happened was that they burned down the DMV, which figure, yeah.
Did I get everyone, Quincy? Did I get you?
I'm probably the same boat as LJ. I'm out in the southwest suburbs. The town to the right of me had a strong presence of riots or protests, and then it had a little of the riots at the tail end of that, but the police department took care of that. And then to the left of me, they had the same thing. We have a mall out there in Bolingbrook area. Nothing. The Bolingbrook Mall, the mall out in Bolingbrook didn't get hit that I know of. It was kind of, we weren't getting any confirmed reportings about what was going to hit because people just sporadically just posting stuff, and we were just chasing around what was true, what wasn't, and it got to the point that the mayor had to come out and say, "We're fine, everything's good over here." So in the town I live in, everything is fine. We haven't got hit. We had a small protest right in front of the police department, but it was very peaceful, very peaceful. People, they spoke exercised their First Amendment right, and they went home.
Well, it sounds as if we've all had varying experiences, or you've had varying experiences in terms of what this. And I'm gonna reframe the narrative. I'm gonna reframe the talking point. I'm not going to look at it as a protest. I think it's beyond that now. It's not just about the young man that was killed. I'm going to refer to it as a civil rights movement because now it's gone above and beyond it. I think you're looking at people from all walks of life, from different demographics, from different countries that are now involved in this. So I'm going to change the narrative for this conversation. I'm hoping that we can change the narrative as we move forward and have these conversations outside of this group, because this is another this appears to be the beginning of another civil rights movement, and it doesn't look like as if it's going to be heading off. Just from my experience, in terms of what I've seen, I live in the southeast suburbs. I'm on the Illinois-Indiana border. I saw looting, and I can't imagine what it was like to be in downtown Chicago, or as Steve mentioned, in Arizona, or even Ken, being on the front lines as a member of law enforcement down in Iowa. But it was very surreal. It was very humbling to see people looting and tearing things up. I'm not far from River Oaks Mall, which is in Calumet City, Illinois, and it looked like a war zone. I've never been to war, but from what I've seen on TV, it is very comparable. There was a frantic pace, people were all over the place. There were people that didn't have anything to do with the civil rights movement that's taking place, and they were literally pulling cars up and running inside, grabbing a couple things and heading out, taking advantage of the situation. And that's the unfortunate part, because that is what is now hijacking the message, so to speak. It's not the concentration of how we got here or got to this point, but now we're looking at all the after effects, all the negativity that's become associated with it. So looking at it from that standpoint, kind of where do you think we are as a country? I mean, just be real. If you want to say we're fucked, if we're screwed, excuse my language, this is a conversation, an opportunity for us to just be upfront. Quincy, where are we at? Quincy, where are we at with this? And I know it's a tricky question, but what are your thoughts?
Let me think about that for a minute. Just get back to me in a minute.
Okay.
So let me put my words together.
Okay. Steve, please.
I mean, I'm pretty opinionated about things, so I don't have a problem.
Absolutely.
So I considered myself somewhere in the center in the beginning before all this started.
Okay.
I'm not an activist. I don't really get involved. You and I had conversations, and I view myself one way. You might view me another way, but
okay.
I'm fairly open-minded. And until this happened, I mean, I didn't really get involved. I don't get involved really in things, and I think what happened to the people that got murdered, hurt by the police is despicable. But once the riot started, I think it completely made me not care and actually completely want to go the other way. So it pushed me way, way to the right. I'm carrying guns with me all around now. I'm shooting anybody I see now. So this is where it's coming. I've heard that from many, many people now. Mike Shimon, him, like all these people are at home with guns. I mean, it is like that close from like crazy riot and like crazy things happening. So I think if somebody doesn't stop all the riots and looting, it's going to get a lot freaking worse. And if you do stop it, then it can get a lot better, and we can get things done and then it can call a civil rights movement done.
So if I'm hearing you correct, and I think that's an interesting point, because being a person of non-color, you can empathize, but once it took.
So let me just start by you. I don't even want to go there, because I will just tell you, I'm Jewish. My parents were through the Holocaust. We've been discriminated against fucking my entire life. So, I'm not looking black or whatever. That kind of thing, that I'm on outer color, is not going to work with me, because we've been discriminated our entire fucking life. So let's not even go there with me anyway.
Well, here's the thing, Steve. The level of discrimination that you face, while you may face discrimination or been challenged or whatever, it still is not the same.
That is not correct. You ask my parents how many times people tried to kill them in their home and rounding them up and kill them. Don't tell me it's not the same.
Okay. So with that,
has
your personal experience been similar to that?
Yep.
Okay.
And my family. So we were living under fear all the time. We moved different countries. I mean, we whatever we created because we escaped from shit, and we dealt with stuff. There was no, Europe, anti-Semitic, how many people got killed? Forget even the World War II, just how many people in Europe got killed, how many Jews got killed because they were Jewish. So, like this whole I'm not black thing doesn't work with me, and just, we've all had our issues.
So that's a great point. And again, let me think about that.
That's why we're having this conversation. I understand that when somebody pulls me over, I'm going to concede the fact that when somebody pulls me over and I'm not black, I'm not facing the same issues in this country, but in the past, my family has, right? So, I know what's going on, but I understand the issues that are applicable when you get stopped and people see you right away and they know what color you are, and you may already look a certain way and there's some prejudice against that. I'm not going to say that doesn't happen, but to say that I don't understand, just don't go there with that. That's all.
Well, let me say this. I will never be a Jewish person, so I won't understand what that's like. But you will never
I
be
think
black.
you can. If you're being discriminated against,
hold
I
on,
think you can.
Steve, let me finish. I can empathize with it because you may have had some challenges and some experiences, but I will never know what that Jewish experience has been like to be called out based on your religion or whatever that case may be. Just like you will never know what it's like to be called out based on your color of your skin, to be stopped, to be harassed, things like that. So while we have some similarities and parallels, I do think that I think we need to be able to understand and respect that while there are parallels and some similarities, there's still differences.
I think there's differences though between people living in the south side of Chicago and people living on the north side of Chicago, whether you're black or white. I think it's an individual experience that everybody has, regardless of color, race, religion. It depends where you happen to be also.
You know what? I'll respect your thought on that. I'm not sure I agree with it, but I respect your thought on that. I want to move on because I don't want to get stuck on that point for too much. Let me hear from LJ. Your thoughts.
What was the question?
Well, we're initially just talking about just kind of where do you see the country being at? Where are we? Where are we in this conversation?
For me, you know, I'm very vocal in our private conversations. Right now, it's complete civil unrest because you can see that across just the world. It's no longer just the United States. In places that we thought it would never be happening, you know, Israel, Germany, there are protests across just the world, and people saying that there's something unjust that is happening, especially to Black men. So right now, the civil unrest that's happening, of course, takes our breath because we're thinking, when will it stop? I don't know if you all saw me kind of talking to somebody off to the side. I was talking to my daughter, and what I was saying to her was, hey, Mug, there's a curfew. Make sure that at some point you're back in this house. She's an adult. Let's be clear. This is an adult woman. And I have to have the conversation of, please make sure that you return back home before the curfew. I don't want you getting pulled over for any reason. We saw what happened with the 2 students in Atlanta. And so it is concerning. And what we're missing is a voice of leadership. In the past, when things like this happened, there was someone to come out and say, hey, wait a minute, we need to come together. We need to have a pause and kind of rebuild us and have that restorative peace within the community. And right now, we're lacking that leadership and that voice, whether, I don't care if it's from the White House or somebody within the community, and us stepping up and being on one accord. So that's where I am. I just think the civil unrest is going to continue. Unfortunately, you know, I have a lot of friends in law enforcement. You know, I work with FBI, things like that. So when I am having those conversations and checking on my friends, it's like, what's going on? So when Kenneth spoke about the things that's happening to them as law enforcement, it's just unbelievable. People are bringing urine and feces and throwing it at the police and trying to, you know, get into their scanners so they can't communicate. And so that makes it even worse that we're being self-destructive to people who potentially could help us. So that's where I am. At some point, we need a voice to lead us back out of this.
Don't you think you need somebody to stop the violence at some point?
Say again, Steve?
Don't you think somebody needs to step up and stop the violence, wherever that may be?
So that's what I mean when I say we need a voice, right?
I mean, that's different though than stopping the violence. You can have a voice that projects, you know, continues violence, right? So it's not necessarily the same thing.
So no, what I mean when I say that voice, the voice is actually the individual who is saying, okay, enough, because we need to regroup and begin to discuss how, I fully understand how we got here with the rioting and the looting, the protesting, all 3 different, right? So I get why we're here, but at some point, that voice is the person who steps forward and say, okay, listen, this is enough. This is what we're going to do in regards to liberation, being restorative. You know, what does that look like? So that will begin to stop the violence that's happening towards one another, as well as the rioting and looting.
That's something, by the way, that's something else that I pointed out to Stan about this thing, is that there haven't really been any demands other than just general, we want equality, we want to stop violence, to stop. I have not heard it, and I've posted, so, and I haven't been active, but since I talked to Stan, I started posting, what is the solution? What's going to make this stop? What concrete steps, is anybody looking for that we can work towards that way? To simply say, we don't want any racism. We don't want, I get it. That's all great, but how do we get there? And it's been like, you know, these are things that we've been wanting, everybody's been wanting for hundreds and hundreds of years, but how do we get there? And nobody's proposed anything yet. There's not a single leader in the group that can say this is what we're looking for.
And that's
at least that I've heard.
Well, a part of that is the trauma. And when you dig deep into trauma and how it alters your DNA, and we're talking about brain cells and et cetera, and what's rooted. So when I'm working with the youth in the community, to hear when I go visit #1 schools in the United States, and then it does become color for young people. When I'm sitting in restorative justice meetings with the police and students who have brought harm, then in those meetings, and to hear police say, well, I'm not understanding why this kid is mad. And the example that I'll give you is the police that's sitting next to me is Caucasian. The family sitting across from me is Black, right? So there was some harm done. Now I have to restore the peace between the two of them because we got to coexist. So what I was trying to explain to the officer is that it's not really about the color of your skin. It becomes about that uniform. This kid don't even know you, but guess what he's seeing consistently in the news is the Black man being harmed by the white cop. So his DNA then becomes altered and his mindset, and it's traumatic for him. So it becomes a trigger, right? So every time I see a white cop, this dude, he against me. He ain't with me. He don't know my people. So that's what I have to hear when I work with the youth, not understanding that this Caucasian cop that's sitting next to me, I do know him and he might be riding with us, right? But to that youth, they don't know that. And to the adults who've experienced trauma that have not had good experiences with law enforcement, that to them is traumatic. So you have to begin to rewire individuals. That's to me what it begins to take.
I get, but that has nothing to do with why riots are going on and looting and I mean, yes, we can feel all those things that you're saying, but I just, as soon as you start going rioting and looting, I mean, and violence, and then this is again, from what I hear, is the only thing that I see when they do that is when you either have a revolution, you want, you know, revolution or independent state. Otherwise, what is the goal when you start violence, more violence?
So let me hold you there, Steve, because I want to hear from Ken, and I know you got some. I know you have some thoughts, but that's going to be a separate topic.
I actually don't. I wish I had solutions. I really don't know how to get to a place. So, it's a systemic thing that's got to go. I mean, I wish there was something I could tell you.
So let's hear from Ken, because we're going to talk about the rioting aspect of it, because I think that's separate from the civil rights movement. You're seeing two different things play out before you.
Unfortunately.
You're seeing two separate things play out before you in the same locale. But I want to hear from Ken real quick.
But this violence is overtaking any good that might come from the civil rights movement, and until you can stop that, all I can think about is violence. So and I'm not the only one, right? I mean, it's a whole slew of people that think that way. That's
true, but we're going to get into that because that's a whole different topic of conversation. I want to hear from Ken, and we're going to talk about that because I think perception is not always reality. So
true.
Go ahead.
You know, it's always interesting to me when I hear a white person talk about Blacks being violent.
No. By the way, I did not say Blacks. I said rioters. There are plenty of white people there. I just like to say they're not Blacks. I said rioters, and there are whites and Blacks there.
Steve, okay. I know you got thoughts. We've let you talk, and we just need everybody to be able to.
It was just a correction when you said Black violence. It's any violence that's rioters, whoever they are.
Correct. Very good. One of the agreements that we had was we were going to let people talk and finish their thoughts.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, appreciate it.
You know, just real quick, historically, and the narrative now that's playing out over the airways is that the majority of people causing the violence and the looting are Blacks. From what I'm seeing firsthand, that's not the case. Historically, I always think of things historically. For people to label us as being the most violent or having violent tendencies, it's hypocritical to me because, you know, from day one since we were brought here, we learned violence and violent tendencies from our overseers to the people that brought us here. When we talk about rioting, as far as being something that goes on in the Black community or amongst groups of Blacks, historically, Wall Street in Tulsa, riots, it was not caused by black people. Rosewood in Florida was not caused by black people. If you go back and look at the history of the United States from the 1950s to now, major rioting was caused because law enforcement killed somebody unjustly in the black. And that's where we're at now. It just didn't start with the gentleman in Minneapolis, Floyd, to cause what's going on now. It started with Philando Castile. It started with Walter Scott in South Carolina. It started with Michael Brown in St. Louis. So there's been things that's been going on year after year where we've been trying to tell, whether it's law enforcement, courts, that we have a problem. There's a problem in law enforcement and black men dying. It's interesting now that since there's so much civil unrest, so much damage as far as property and fires and communities in disarray, now we see officers charged immediately. Now we see officers kneeling. We're seeing things that we've never seen. So my question is the violence working? Because some of the things that we're seeing now, we haven't seen in past civil unrest moments. We're dealing with a different generation that they don't march. We're dealing with a generation that is not going to want to have sit downs and discuss some things and see what's going on. We're dealing with a generation, man, that's frustrated. They're going to take to the streets in numbers. They're going to mobilize with social media, and they're going to get together and they're going to try to get their point across. And I've never seen anything like this. I don't think anyone in this panel has ever seen anything like this. So I'll go back to my original question. Is the violence getting attention and is it working? Because what's happening now is we've got people in place that now want to talk and want to make changes, want to make arrests, and we haven't seen that in the past.
Great point. Great point. And I think one of the things that was key in what you were talking about is that you're on the front lines and you're seeing it from yourself.
Yes.
I think a lot of and I know we all have different levels of social media interaction and also different sources of social media interaction. But I think the one thing that has been eye-catching is the on the ground zero videos of people at many of these protests, at many of these gatherings that are showing that the rioters really, the narrative is that the rioters generally are people of color, but
yes,
what we're seeing is that's not the case. And
I will tell you, Stan, I have seen actually more white people than black people when they were looting the mall. I've never said personally, can't speak for everybody. Sure. I've said whites and blacks or whoever. I've seen a slew of all kinds of people that are taking advantage of the situation. Actually, a whole bunch of drunk people, a whole bunch of just taking advantage and going crazy is what I saw. And I've always said, whites, blacks, whoever. I've seen plenty of protesters, all white too. They're not just all black. So I'm basically saying any violence is going to just beget more violence. And I understand that you said you are maybe getting more responses now, but at some point this continues. It's just, I know you don't want martial law, but you will get martial law. You will get things that you don't want to get. And I've seen that from living in Israel. How about that? There's no better place to give you an example of that, of what can happen if you get violent. It's Palestinians are not going to win, right? They're just going to get worse and worse. They're going to get more beat down, and it's going to happen here if it continues. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. See, my issue with the whole thing right now is, and I mean, I love that everybody is doing the Black Lives Matter. I mean, I don't really practice it because I think it's been hijacked. I think it's been totally hijacked. And like Steve says, and I respect his opinion, like he just said, like just a couple minutes ago, how he saw more white people looting and destroying and all this stuff. And this is supposed to be a movement for Black lives, okay? He just said at the beginning of this podcast that if this violence still continues, he could care less.
No, I did not say that. I did not say that.
You say you lean more.
Violence continues.
You say you're gonna lean more right. You say you're gonna lean more right, meaning that right?
Yeah, I'm gonna become more conservative and more radical than I am. That's what I said. Not that I don't care.
So I must have. Well, the general sense is what I hear on Facebook, on social media, things like that. People are saying that, yeah, George Floyd, it's sad that George Floyd died and everything, but this rioting and looting, all this stuff is getting me away from what the main message is. So I get a little leery, and like I always say this, like I don't like the white savior when it comes down to black causes. I don't like it because they like to control the narrative. They like to control the narrative. Like I have people who, I mean, with my gun club, which is a majority of black gun owners, responsible gun owners, we're all professionals and everything. And I mean, I love my white people. I love you guys to death and everything. I know what you guys are doing for it. But you come in and talk about my gun club and try to tell people what my gun club is all about, and you don't have a damn clue what we all about.
By the way, who's they? That's like, by the way, I don't like the fact that you say that, because when you say you and they, it's like me saying all black people are the same. Please don't say that.
I mean, I'm not a PC person. I'm not trying to disrespect you or anything like that. But one thing about it is I say it like it is. And I mean, I don't, if you decide you want to call us and them, I mean, you're not going to hurt my feelings. So that's how I am. So.
Except I'll be called racist if I do. That's the problem.
I've been called racist and other things too, but and I get your understanding. I get your understanding. So I've been called worse things than being racist. So believe me, we all tough. We got tough skins. When we could still go there and I'd be fine. But the whole point is, the whole thing is this movement. This is a movement and everything. And when I'm trying to talk to the young people, because I'm an activist with the Second Amendment community, especially in the Black community with the Second Amendment. I try to talk to the youth who is activating us. So you don't, I mean, understand, yeah, you got your frustration with law enforcement, but you can't go after law enforcement. It's the lawmaker. You got to go up, like, who's your state rep? Who's your state senator? Who's your alderman? I was like, you need to get on the phone with them right now and talk about that. We need to get a law change, a law passed. Like yesterday, I've been on the phone sending emails to my legislator and say we need a law for, and I call it the public servant accountability bill. And I was kind of cute with it, calling it the HB 1865, because that's the year that slaves got free. So I've been on the phone, I've been sending emails, I've been doing a lot of stuff lately, and I've been trying to get this drilled up, especially in the state of Illinois, telling the youth, yeah, be upset with the police officers, but they are doing what the lawmakers telling them to do. You need to go after the lawmakers. That's who you need to go after. That's who you need to protest, the lawmakers.
That's right.
And I think that gives us a good segue to a point that Steve brought up earlier. And I think this is a point that I'd like to get to. And that is, this seems to be rinse and repeat. Someone gets harmed, someone gets brutalized, beaten, murdered, whatever the case may be. There's protests, then there's violence, and there's a narrative, and there's, I mean, we've seen this before, just not to this magnitude. I think the closest equivalent that I can think of is the Rodney King piece, but it never took on magnitude to this point, where it's gone global. But I think that's a great segue to talk about what are some of the solutions. What is it that you want? If we had an opportunity to sit down with key decision makers that could change laws or change department policies, what are some of those things that you would like to see? Also, Ken, I think because you have a unique perspective as a member of law enforcement, what are some things that as a member of law enforcement that you've seen, you say, wow, you know what? If I had my way, I would look to change this, or we could do this better. What would that sound like?
Well, the first thing I would say is that there needs to be better police reform to get rid of bad cops.
Better what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Better what?
Better police reform to get rid of bad cops. Every department, all the officers know which officers they don't want to be around or work around because they don't want to be involved in a lawsuit. But they know this officer is doing something. But the culture of most law enforcement agencies is they are real slow to get rid of problem officers. Mm-hmm. And what you're seeing now is that most of these officers that are involved in these incidents across the country, if you look at their history, it tells you the story right there. You know, problems year in and year out, and it culminates with something bad happening. You know, some of these departments have a strong police union, where it's more difficult to get rid of problem officers. But there really needs to be a strong initiative for police reform and accountability for law enforcement.
So how do you, I have a question for you. How do you stop, you know, because I think that there's a brotherhood, right? I mean, do police officers, and I don't know this, I'm asking because I only watch TV for that, but do police officers really protect each other and don't rat each other out or whatever it is? Do they do that, or does that happen?
That happens. I mean,
how do you change that?
Well, you change it by hiring better officers. You change it by getting rid of that culture where you look the other way when you know something's wrong. Sometimes for officers who do report problem officers, no one listens to them. You know, no one wants to take it seriously or create any type of waves. But I mean, it's a problem. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of good officers out there who don't engage in these type of misconduct issues. But the problem is that the few that do engage in misconduct and issues such as what we're seeing now, it damages credibility and relations between the police and communities of color. So, you know, all it takes is one person who's had a history of doing some messed up stuff, involved in whether it's brutality issues with citizens, or in this case in Minneapolis, a murder, because that's what it was, a murder. And, you know, you see what can happen.
So let me chime in because let me piggyback off of that because I think what Ken brought up is a great point. Because, and Ken, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think with any occupation, there's your training manual, so to speak, or your onboarding process. But really, where you get the nuts and bolts, I don't care if it's you know, the Applebee's or if it's at a Target or if it's law enforcement, you're usually paired with someone who's a little bit more senior in that area to kind of train you and show you the ropes. And what it sounds like and what it looks like is that at some point we need to be able to, when I say we, meaning people working with the legislatures, working with the local community, working with your local municipalities to weed some of those people out, because it doesn't do much good to have police reform and incorporate that training when they're out in the community and out in the field with an officer who is still stuck doing it this way or whatever way that they've been doing it, and it's unhealthy to the community. It's unhealthy for the incoming individual, and it continues to put a strain on community relationships. Am I that far off, Ken?
No, you're not off at all. You're right on the money. You know, we need to start recruiting. I've always said we need to recruit more officers that look like the neighborhoods that we're policing.
Okay.
From what you're seeing in a lot of these areas, you got the police who are predominantly white, and they're trying to police areas of color where there's very few officers of color on the department. That's a problem. That's always been a problem. But, you know, the officers of color that are on the department, they have to stand up when they see issues such as this, misconduct, because that's another way that things are going to change. You know, if these officers of color, if you're conscious and you're concerned, you know, I have an adult son that looks like me. I know what can happen if he encounters the police or a bad officer. We've all, you know, you're a parent of a black son. We've all had kids at some point on police encounters because we pretty much know our kids are going to encounter the police at some point. But I mean, it's definitely important that departments start recruiting officers that look like the neighborhoods, especially neighborhoods of color that they're policing.
What kind of backlash would a police officer get if you report stuff like that? Though? I mean, you're part of it. Is there a lot of backlash from other officers? Do they get in trouble then? I mean, and again, I don't know. It's a question again. Just
I mean, the police
trying to get
culture.
educated.
The police culture is very tight knit. A lot of times it's a good old boys club, you know. So if someone steps outside of that, there's going to be some ostracizing that goes on, you know. But it all depends on that person. If that person is strong enough to deal with whatever consequences that come out of it, you know, that's what determines the outcome. I mean, you still got to do the right thing. I mean, we take an oath to serve and protect, and it's supposedly to do what's right. So if you see something wrong, you have to do something.
So there should be some consequences then for anybody who harasses a police officer. They report something then too, right? So it's got to be all kinds of changes in the police department then.
That's a federal law, isn't it? Retaliation.
I'm
Is that
sorry,
like
sir.
is that is already a law for retaliation for reporting, right?
Yes, I mean, yes. Generally, it's supposed to be protected, but like I said, it's a culture, man. It's a tight knit culture, and we know how things work in a good old boys type of culture. You know, step outside of that.
I think that in speaking in regards to the police, I think about, you know, staffing in schools, right? Where most of your teachers are Caucasian in an urban community. So my question goes to, you said hiring more officers that look like the community. Absolutely. But we know that can work against you because everybody ain't riding with me, right?
Right, you're right.
So is there anything that's happening where police go through any type of training when you're in a different environment around culturally responsiveness to a community that you're not in? Because one of the ways that I've been able to connect with so many youth is because of my background, right?
Right.
I can't say, oh, you know, I grew up, I ain't never have any problems, right? No, I'm from the projects. So they can relate to that, right? And they see the come up. So is there anything happening in law enforcement around that aspect to train officers?
Well, right now, in the last 5 to 6 years, we've started training in implicit bias, and also de-escalation. All officers are getting trained in that now, but you know, does it work? You know, I don't know. If someone has a stereotype, if someone has never been around any people of color and they have their own stereotypes of how they're going to be or what to expect, this is the wrong profession to get in, because you know you encounter people that you have stereotypes about in a negative situation at some point. So, you know, I don't know how you get rid of those biases that officers have when they do come on the department, because most likely they're going to be around others that have those same biases also. So it's really kind of hard, unless they change or they're a different kind of officer when they come on, to really get around that. So, I mean, we're training with implicit bias and de-escalation, but how effective it is, I couldn't tell you.
But
I mean,
there's
it's just
another point, there's one more point, right? The officers that do serve in certain communities over and over and over again for many years. So, I mean, I've heard from some of them, some of them just get desensitized. Some of them just because they change themselves individual, and I think some of them care less, some of them might care more. But I mean, I've heard of not related to this, but homicide detectives in Chicago mostly deal with gang crime. I mean, they go on and like make jokes about the people that die. I mean, eventually it's because they're just used to seeing that. So does that happen? Obviously, I don't know. You know, I've heard it happen. So,
I mean, there's some things when you do this job long enough, there's some things you do to relieve stress, because you do see a lot of things that a lot of people are not supposed to see. But bottom line, I think what works for me, I've been doing it for 30 years, and what works for officers who get it is, first and foremost, you got to do this job, and you got to treat the people that you encounter like a loved one. You know, whether it's your son, you know, how would you treat your son? How would you want somebody to treat your kids, your aunts, people that you really love? And I think if you do the job that way, you're more effective at it. It's only those that see certain people that don't look like them, or have no connection with them, that have negative experiences or negative encounters.
So do you feel like there's no training in the world to change somebody's mind in that profession with the bias?
I mean, look where we're at. You know, we're still seeing the same.
I knew it was
thing
a waste of time.
As black men unarmed getting killed or abused, and you know, even with the new training that's supposed to be working as far as de-escalation or implicit bias, it's still going on. So it's like, how effective is it?
So let me chime in and say a couple things. First off, Ken, I appreciate you sharing your perspective as a member of law enforcement. I do want to make sure that our online people know that Ken is not representing any particular law enforcement agency or department. He's just sharing his personal experience and his personal opinion and knowledge. And I think it's good to hear from somebody who's dealing with this, who is a person of color, because I think one of the things that has been missing throughout a number of these officer-involved situations has been the Black law enforcement officer voice. And I think it's really good to hear like what's going through that officer's head, you know, because these are the people that look like us, sometimes reflect the community, but more importantly, reflect the people that sometimes or oftentimes abuse. So I want to be able to get that perspective. I kind of want to move away because I think we all are aware of the challenges that are there. I kind of want to kind of go back to what are some of the hard asks that we want. So I think one of the things that was great was a hard ask is, hey, we want to have, we would like to see officers that reflect the community. So whether it's a predominantly Hispanic community, African American community, I know in the like in the Broadway, the Halstead division area. I'm sorry, Halstead and Addison, Waveland area. There's a demographic that reflects the gay community up there as far as law enforcement. So what that looks like for each individual community, I think that's a hard ask. That if you can go to your elected official, your legislature to say, this is something I think would help with moving community relationships with the police department forward. I think the second thing that's come up is weeding out those law enforcement officers who, and I've used this analogy. Sometimes people are good people, but they're not right for that job.
Right.
I am a great person. I would make a terrible server. I am a great person. I would make a terrible pastor. Are we sometimes, are we asking a fish to climb a tree? Are we asking people to do something they're not capable of? Hey, you know what? Law enforcement is a good job. You know, the pay, the benefits, you know, the stress that comes with it sometimes sucks. And then things like this happen and you're overstressed. But for the most part, it's a relatively good career. And I think, you know,
I mean, it's way underpaid for what you do, by the way. I mean, there's no way I would do that job for the money you make, but.
Well, but here's the thing. Somebody's got to be doing it because we have a lot of them.
I get it, but don't say it's good. I mean, it's paid, but it's not worth what you're doing. I mean, it's not equal to what you're doing for. So I'll say so.
I used to be in the military for 20 years, so I know that story. So
I agree with you too on that. I agree with you too.
So, but relatively speaking, you can make a career. Let me phrase it that way. You can make a career out of it. So, with that, another hard ask from elected officials is, hey, we need to work to weed out those bad officers because those bad officers are making it difficult. Because let me tell you something, as a community member, as a person of color, I want to be able to count and trust on law enforcement.
Right.
Do you think that's a lawmaker's responsibility? Or you think that should be like the departments, the police department's responsibility? Well,
I think the conversation can happen. I think things can happen when you get your lawmakers and your legislators involved in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And I may be wrong. I don't know if it's something that can just be arbitrarily done at a community level with community activists holding conversations in town halls. I do think that you need to have some push from somewhere if you want to be able to get that ball moving. Because again, you're not only dealing with the law enforcement officers themselves, you're dealing with the department, you're dealing with the union. So there's a lot of moving parts to that. And it takes a lot, it takes more than just community activism to be able to get that moving.
How hard is it to fire a police officer though, right? I mean, whenever you got a union now, you're gonna have, just like how hard it is to fire a bad teacher. I mean, you're gonna have to make it really easy to fire somebody who does that. Otherwise, you're doing nothing.
So let me
I'm going to blame that on unions. That's unions overall. It's hard to get rid of somebody that doesn't do a good job.
I agree with you on that one, Steve.
So let me ask you this. And this is a question. Think about this. If your child was in a school and had a teacher that did not care for children, teaching them, and was considered a bad teacher, what would you have to remove?
So I will tell you that happened to us. That happened to us.
Let me finish my analogy. So law enforcement, and again, I don't want this to be piled on law enforcement, but this is just the one thing that it blows my mind that this is one profession that no matter what, those people that work with that individual will rally around that individual, even if they know that they're not in the right, they will still rally around that individual. I've yet to see teachers rally around a teacher that's a pedophile or someone that hates.
Unless you can have real proof.
Hates working in a hospital with people. But this is the one occupation that that kind of goes out the window. So it's just something food for thought because you brought that up, Steve, in terms of how difficult is it to.
It's called tribalism. That's tribalism. I mean, every pocket does that. I mean, it's the black community, it's the white community, it's the professional law enforcement. Even like that when I was in the military, it's not just law enforcement. Like, we like to protect our own. We don't like to air our dirty laundry out in the public, but we try to keep things in house and we beat them up in house. I know we did that in the military. But I'm not gonna throw you on the bus out in the public, but we're gonna take care of business once the door closes.
Okay.
Right. And I'll tell you about the teachers. So we lived in a fairly wealthy community with a lot of, fairly wealthy individuals there. And there was a few bad teachers that just didn't care about their jobs anymore. They were old, they were union, they just didn't care. And there was no way to get rid of them. No matter what you did, no matter how much, they just didn't care, right? I mean, they didn't rape anybody or they didn't assault anybody because that'd be too obvious, but they're just really bad teachers who didn't care anymore. You can't get rid of them because unions, you just can't.
So
I'm assuming with the police will be the same unless they do something as terrible as what they just did. And they got caught on tape. Otherwise, I think you might have a really hard time even firing those people.
And so to that point, that's a work in progress in terms of how, but the what is a hard ask is we would like to see a way. And that's beyond that's not my wheelhouse. I don't know how to work with unions and how to work with unions. But I think, again, a hard ask, because now I want to start to move to solutions. What are those hard asks? So a hard ask is officers that reflect the community that they work in, a more linear way of being able to remove officers that are bad, corrupt, or just not good for the community. Lisa, I think you have a very unique standpoint or perspective, I should say, and that is, you touched on it, and this is something that's not discussed enough, and that is the trauma and the PTSD that you deal with when you deal with families, young people, and community members. From that perspective, what is it that you would like to see in terms of, or how can the community or how can society help you move that initiative forward? Because that's something that's completely disregarded. And like you said, you deal with these issues and they're reflected and acted out in other ways in the classroom or be in the community or so forth.
Right. So my hard ask would be equity.
Equity?
Schools,
okay.
Right? So it started with COVID. That exposed things where, Chicago, many students don't have the internet. So it's, it started there. And that for a student is traumatic, the haves and the have-nots. So how do we kind of close the gap on that where within schools, children feel some type of equity, whether I go to school at Whitney Young or I go over here, to Bam Bam School, right? So there's some balance brought in that. So I would be looking to my lawmakers to discuss education starting from that kindergarten piece and being restorative with the families. So not just the students, so with families overall, those community meetings with families, we hear their voices. People want to be heard. At the end of the day, you heard my request and something is happening in regards to that request. It just isn't falling on deaf ears. So a part of us healing and moving forward is looking at the school systems so that when things like this do happen, I'm not saying, hey, wait a minute, you all, let's organize. There are more like-minded people saying, let's begin to organize, but it does start in each of our individual homes. And what's one way to get to everybody, right? People have children in schools. I got that. People have children in schools, so that would be my hard ask, looking at the money and the funding to bring in those programs to heal the community and build relationships with the police and bringing the police into schools, talking to parents and hearing the police side of it, right? So that's kind of where my brain goes.
Okay.
Can I interject for 1 second to that point, although? The education, so I'm going to speak again from just experience back in Israel, right? And the education there. So Israel gave a lot of money to Palestinians for education, to build their cities, a lot of money to help them. Unfortunately, a lot of it just went to the leadership, ended up building tunnels, buying rockets, buying whatever. And in education, all they did is teach hate and racism. I mean, like, reverse, right? Like hate all the Jews, hate Israel, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think just giving money and equipment is enough. I think the right education should also be appropriate.
So Steve, I spoke to programs.
Go ahead.
Yes.
So I'm speaking to programs, right? I'm not saying, hey, I already know money not gonna fix it. So it's the programs that you bring in and the individuals that you bring in to work with your youth, to work with the families, and put that in front of people. So when you begin to systematically develop those programs and look at the funding of what it will cost to bring those programs in, and then of course you have those watchdogs. I don't care what you do. We, for eons, have seen that there's always going to be somebody crooked. There's always going to be somebody to infiltrate. That's always going to exist. It's not going away. So having those watchdogs to say that this really is happening at the level that I am in education, we are policed, right? And I'm one of those do the right things. You know, I'm not going to find a loophole because my family like to eat and we like to travel. So,
right. I'm not saying you will. I mean, it's just a general
it
thing.
is. You have to, but there has to be at some point some type of balance when we look at programs and how to heal your community. You started at a pre-K level and began to work with those families.
Right. And I'll say one more thing that helped in Israel and Palestinians was bringing kids together from both countries and having them kind of share things together. It wasn't like Palestinians learned together, Israelis together. So they brought kids from Israel, kids from Palestine, just kind of put them together. So you don't have just your black community. I mean, and educate, whatever programs they did, they tried to merge them together and have mixing of religion in that case, but it'll be of racist things like that.
Right.
I think it's important, right? Otherwise, you're not exposed to white people. We're not exposed to black people. It just still stays segregated.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to hear the youth. So I run a lot of focus groups within the school to find, and it's mixed groups because I want to know what you think about the teachers, right? And this is your opportunity to tell me which one of them teachers is just giving you the business. You don't like them, right?
Right.
But then on the flip side, who are, you know, your good teachers? And it's not about aha, I got you moments, because I go back and share that information with the staff. These are the voices that we hear, and it brought about a lot of change in the school. Okay.
And starting from their kids is a great. I mean, what you got to do that when you're young, so you grow up with love instead of hate of each other.
Absolutely.
And understanding, maybe not love, but at least understanding of each other.
Absolutely.
And I think you hit on something, Steve, because generally by the time people are, in my experience, I'm going to use I statement. My experience has been generally by the time people are talking to young people, it's already too late because they've already faced the trauma. They're already now they're not in thriving mode, they're in survival mode. It's now it's self-preservation. How can I manage this so I can at least get out or escape this reality, so to speak? So I do think that it's something to be said in terms of building these relationships, instilling these values, and then also incorporating them in the process at an early age, because trust is going to be key. It's hard to rebuild trust once it's broken, whether you're in a school or had a bad experience, whatever the case may be. I think the key is getting those people on board and building a level of trust with them at an earlier age. I do, because I know we've had a lot of good input. It's not an easy conversation to have, and we can go on and on. I want to give us about 5 more minutes, but I want to touch base with Quincy because I think he had a really great hard ask as far as a piece of legislation that he's looking to introduce, that he's had some conversation with some lawmakers on. Quincy, can you talk about that?
So yeah, so doing this whole protest and everything, I mean, I'm not the one to go out in the streets and everything because I am an essential worker and I'm worried about the COVID-19 type thing. Otherwise, I'd have been out there in the streets with them. But I wanted to respect my coworkers on that. So I've been doing stuff behind the scenes and I'm trying to encourage my members of my gun club to do the same. So one of the hard asks was this is supposed to be a nation of laws. We are built on nations of laws, law and order and all that stuff. So the idea is it doesn't matter if you're the homeless man on the street corner of the south side of Chicago or the president of the United States, nobody's above the law. So we need to have a law to say no immunity. Like, so, but it's still protect, and it's not the dog pound, the law enforcement, it's every public servant So from politics.
What do you mean no immunity? What do you mean by no immunity? Can you explain that?
No immunity, meaning that I am. You are subject to the same laws that I am as a civilian. So if I broke a law as a civilian, I will be held accountable. That individual in that public realm, public subject realm, should be held at that same standard as I am.
Aren't they? Aren't police officers the same? I mean, I don't know.
That's the question. We don't know. We know that. We know the question is they have these. It was a law, and I forgot what it is, what year it was. And I read all it, but they took out that law enforcement had immunity. They had a little broader range when it comes to justified killings or justified, self-defense shootings.
Yeah.
I know in the state of Illinois, I'm a concealed carry person. We got the Castle Doctrine. If somebody comes to my house, I am allowed to shoot. We do not have your stand the ground law here in Illinois. So, which is fine. So, because I ain't feeling that stand your laws. Retreat. Try to retreat and try to do everything you can to get away from that situation. That's how I believe. But if I believe that, like Kenneth was saying, that if the law enforcement is trying to de-escalate the situation and it's keeping getting escalating, and the person, and you shoot the person and you got no gun and everything, they should be held accountable as if I was a concealed carry person. So I am a concealed carry person. If I was in that same situation as law enforcement, I would have been going to jail, going to prison for probably the rest of my life. So there should be the same standard with law enforcement. The way I look at it is nobody is above the law.
When are you allowed to defend yourself? Somebody throws at you, something at you, spits at you.
When your life is in danger.
Yeah. Even if someone makes you mad, it's not a justification to shoot him. It's
no, if somebody yells at you, obviously, but if somebody throws a brick at you, are you allowed to?
If your life is in danger, if you could articulate that your life is in danger, and it could be a justified suit.
Yeah. But if someone makes you mad or you don't like what they're saying, that's not justification.
I get that. I totally get that.
Unfortunately, that does happen. And that's one of the things that we're trying to work toward preventing. Again, this is a conversation that can go on and on. One of the things that we did not have an opportunity to talk about, and I would like to maybe get with you maybe a little bit later date, and that is the economic fallout of what all this will look like after everything is settled.
I don't think we know yet. It's too early.
A good amount of time on, but I want to respect everyone's time here. I know I have another call. And again, this is a very passionate subject that people are talking about because people want solutions. People want to be able to feel safe in their community. People want to feel safe when there are issues that they have to have interaction with a member of law enforcement, and they just want a level of trust. So I know this is a hot button topic. It feels that this situation is going to repeat. It's just taking on a new level of magnitude in terms of the exposure, the engagement, because now it's gone deep. But I think this is a good conversation to have because we're at a crossroads as a country. This is a chance for us to really right some wrongs because we've got everyone's attention. The whole world is watching. And I think I want to know what are some hard asks. And I think that this group came up with a couple hard asks that I think are manageable, that are workable.
I think overnight. I think very reasonable. I personally think very reasonable. And I've been asking for what people are asking for, what's going to make people happy. That's the first time I've actually appreciated and I've heard some actual concrete things that people can actually work for and do. So I appreciated that.
Absolutely. And all of our experiences are different. That's why I want to have this group here because demographically, we live in different areas. Economically, we're in different places. Geographically. But the key piece is people came on this show wanting to have a voice, wanted to be able to share, hey, I'm frustrated, but whatever your perspective is, my perspective is different from Steve's, which is different from LJ's, which is different from Ken's or Quincy's, but ultimately trying to find workable management solutions. And this is where this starts. Being able to have these difficult conversations, no matter how difficult it is, no matter things that you don't want to hear, but being able to put it out there, being able to articulate it in a manner that's not divisive, uncomfortable, but not divisive, and being able to try and move things forward. So
I'd like to, Stan, I'd like to bring one. I'm sorry, just nobody brought it up, but I've heard it a few times again, and
Okay.
I'd like to mention it. We don't have to discuss it, but these protests are not because a police officer killed a black person, no doubt, right? How come nobody does anything when you have all that black on black violence? People are trying, but why are there no same demonstrations? But how many people die in Chicago every day?
so let
Can I
me,
say something on that?
Give me the.
And I mean that. I
Loose
mean,
up
I'm-
the
wait.
Oh,
Here's the
for
thing.
real now. That's a whole
Here's the
nother
thing.
ball
Okay, you know
game.
what?
We got a whole
Can
nother
I
call
say
at
something real
8:30.
quick?
Wait, wait,
Can I
guys.
speak on that quick?
I will give 2.
Sorry.
Wait, no. I will give 2 minutes because I think that's a great point because
Let
I
Ken go.
here's an answer. I will give 2 minutes. I'll go Quincy, Ken, LJ, and then I'll wrap up. Quincy, 2 minutes.
I'm gonna give you 30 seconds. We need the Democratic states or cities to loosen up the restrictions of gun laws. Gun laws are racist. Always had the first gun law was introduced in 1690. Free black men, and the white people in Virginia wasn't feeling that, so they put a gun control law to stop the black man from owning a firearm. So, and there's been a slippery slope since then. So loosen up the laws.
Okay.
Well, you're in a Democratic, so that's vote them out. I mean, vote Republican, you'll be fine.
Hey,
Another
Republicans have signed into law gun control, and one notably, the famous president Ronald Reagan. The Muffer Act with the Black Panthers in 1967.
And that law was designed to take the hands out of African Americans primarily. Ken, 2 minutes.
First of all, it makes me sick whenever I hear that term black on black crime. And the reason why it makes me sick is every community has people that look like them, whether it's the white community, Asian community, Latino community. They commit crimes based on where they live. Usually it's against someone that looks like them.
Yes.
Never once have I heard in the media or from any person, white or otherwise, why is there so much white on white crime? Why is there so much Latino on Latino?
But you also don't get around.
Hold on, Steve.
I'll be quiet. Sorry.
Because what it does, it switches the narrative and stigmatizes the black community like we have a special crime that we commit against each other, when in reality, people who look like the same as the person that they live next to are committing the same kind of crimes. Like I said, you don't hear about white on white crime. You don't hear about Latino crime. No one calls it that. But for whatever reason, and we know why, this term black on black crime is used to justify what happens to us in the judicial system. That's the only reason why they use that term. So,
Okay, so
you know,
forget how many people died.
We know what it
How
is.
many people?
Steve?
I mean, I have a few points on that, but I cannot be quiet on that. I'm sorry.
We can't. You asked. We're giving you. We're going around.
You that quick
You asked
answer.
a question.
Let me say this, because you took it right out of my mouth. When you do your research and you look at the data,
Yes.
you got to do your research and look at the data, and
Yes.
you got to look at how the narrative is being spun for Black folks, right? And it creates that fear around people. Okay, even sometimes amongst ourselves, you go into a girl, lock your doors, right? Girl, I ain't going over there. That party might get shot up, right? But who did that to create that? Because when you look at the data and you look at the prison system and what's being created for us, it's a total another ball game. Like you said, there is white on white crime. It's just not publicized.
It's called crime.
Blacks. It's just
you can't use. I'm sorry, but you can't do that. But I don't see any marching going on of a white police or of any white police killing a white person. I mean, and don't tell me
That's
there's no
your fault.
or no wrongful death.
Then.
Where's the marches? It's just not. I'm sorry.
You've asked the question. We're giving you the answer. You may not like the answer, but we're giving you the answer.
That's white people's fault then.
Let me close this out.
There wasn't an answer. I'm sorry. There was not really an answer.
I'm going to close this out.
I mean, how many black people got killed how many people got killed in Chicago since the beginning of the year?
The crime is statistic. I mean, it's proximity related. 80% of African Americans are killed by African Americans within an 8-mile radius. 86% of Caucasians. So crime is a form, and it's consistent with proximity. So the numbers are out there. What the narrative is different. So I'm going to leave it on that. This is a subject that we can broach and go on and on. I appreciate everyone being here. I've got another group that's waiting, and I know they've got some passionate things too. But again, I appreciate everyone jumping on the call this evening.
I like this. I like this.
I appreciate it. No, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, man. Everybody else, thank you.
You have a different point of view and a different perspective. So again, thank you, everyone. I've got to get this other group on because I'm excited to hear from them as well. So
y'all be safe.
Thank you, guys.
All right,
Good luck and
appreciate it.
everybody stay safe.
all right, take care.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.